For about 114 years, ever since the first college football game was played in 1869 between Rutgers and Princeton, the first ever college football game, the champion, for the most part, was always decided by somebody's opinion. You know, polls. Polls always decided the champion. And I was thinking about, now it's not that case. I mean, we're going to play it on the field. ASU has a chance. We have to admit, right now, they've got a chance. There's 8 teams left. By the time they play, it's going to be 7 because somebody's going to lose tonight. And they've got a shot. If they can win this game against Texas, you start to think, why not? Why not win a national championship? And I was thinking to myself, what would be this would be the most unlikely champion, right? This would have to be the most unlikely champion. So I went back and I looked and I spent some time looking, and I was like, okay, to me, what were the unlikely teams? And I saw some. 1990, Georgia Tech was one of those teams. I think they might have split it with Colorado. There was a Tennessee team in 1998. So there were some teams that I was looking at. Georgia Tech was unranked. They were as low as number 16 in November. Then they beat number 1 Virginia, and they ended up winning a part of a national championship. Tennessee in 98 was somewhat unlikely. But the one that really stands out more than anyone to me is BYU. In 1984, BYU literally came out of nowhere to go undefeated, beat Michigan in the Holiday Bowl, and win the national championship. They ended up 13-0 overall. They were 8-0 in the conference, and it was an upstart team that nobody knew a whole lot about. Like, they weren't anywhere to be found, that 1984 team. They won the Western Athletic Conference, for goodness sake. But, it wasn't Steve Young playing quarterback. I think that was Robbie Boscow. I was looking at it wasn't Steve Young. It wasn't McMahon. But, they ended up winning a big game against Pitt early. Pitt was ranked number 3, and that kind of helped them. And then they just kept winning and winning and winning and winning, and just, all of a sudden, the next thing you know, BYU is your national champion after they beat Michigan in the Holiday Bowl, the 1984 BYU team. So I was thinking about what would happen if ASU was able to go on a run. How unlikely would it be that this ASU team, which kind of came out of nowhere and win the national, and the comparison to me was the BYU 84 team. Most of our listeners have no idea about that team, but some maybe do. Some listeners probably are old enough to remember that BYU team, especially we've got a big Mormon population here in Arizona, and a lot of you probably went to BYU. And I don't remember that team overall, but they went on a roll. They beat Pittsburgh and then Baylor and Tulsa and Hawaii and Colorado State and Wyoming and Air Force. They weren't playing the best of teams. But all of a sudden, the polling had them at the top, and then they go to the Holiday Bowl to play Michigan. They win the game 24-17, and then BYU ends up being, your national championship team behind Robbie Bosco as the quarterback.
Well, that's what used to make it so hard for you to be an unlikely champion, is you had to end the year number 1 in the polling.
Had to end the year number 1.
Or in the BCS era, you had to be 1 or 2 to make it into the championship, and then you had to win that game. Back then, Gambo, you basically had to play a tougher schedule in your non-conference. You basically had to try to schedule playoff games a lot of the time early in the year.
Yep.
And if you didn't win those games, it didn't mean your season was over, but, you're probably not going to be in the top 2 at that point. So that's the fun of the college football playoff. When they first made it 4 teams, you were usually not going to get surprise teams. You were probably going to get 4 really dominant teams.
Yeah.
Usually.
Without that, you had a lot of controversy. You had a lot of debate. You were always debating it. It was the polls, and can you end up number 1 in a poll? And BYU at the time in 84, but the end of the 84 regular season, the coaches and the writers were all on the same page. BYU was the only major college program in America without a loss. They were number 1 in both polls. So that was a poll thing. This is different. But again, I think the unlikelihood of BYU came out of nowhere to go undefeated, win a national championship. If ASU was able to do it, it would be very similar. You've come out of nowhere. You have picked to finish last in the conference.
Which would feel less likely to you if they were to happen? ASU winning the national championship, or somebody like Boise State, which is probably the only team ranked near them, I would think, in terms of program size and success and all those things. Boise State's the other not obvious one, right? Which one seems less likely to have happened if you like rewound the clock to the beginning of the season? ASU was projected to be dead last in the Big 12.
ASU was more unlikely
Than Boise State to even win a championship.
Yeah,
I think I'd have to agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, you're coming into the Big 12. You didn't have a good year last year. You were starting a new quarterback. You were starting
your program's still kind of reeling from all the punishments of the Herm Edwards era.
Which really didn't affect them, which is crazy. It really didn't affect them. But I would say, I mean, and I was in Boise, Idaho, actually, when Boise State played Washington State. I remember flying out on the plane to Idaho, and this was just a couple of months ago, and it was packed with from Arizona, packed with Washington State fans that were going
on the road
on the road to the game. Boise State beat the hell out of them. They beat the hell out of them in that football game. And at that point, Boise State was recognized a lot earlier than ASU was. I think ASU did not get national recognition until they beat K-State, and that was like week 11. I don't think the other games, I don't think the Utah game mattered. The Kansas State, they mattered, but in the grand scheme of things from the national, it was like, it wasn't until they beat K-State and then BYU, and I was at that BYU game because that was crazy. It wasn't until they won those games it was like, oh my God, ASU's for real. Like, hey guys, this team is for real. They're no joke. But it wasn't until the K-State game when they won that one, it was like, okay, because K-State was good and they were ranked, and then you beat them, and then you beat. Well, one time we were talking about just get to a good bowl game, try to win 1 out of 2 of these games. Well, they won both of those games, and at that point, they got the recognition that they deserved.
I think that Utah game on October 11th probably helped set the tempo.
Cam Rising was so bad.
Yeah, no, I agree.
He was coming back. He hadn't played in a long time. He was coming back. Couldn't throw the football. Utah was no good this year. They were just not a good football team.
And then, yeah, you're right. K-State in November. Then you immediately follow that with the BYU. Did you see the stuff the BYU players were saying about how their bowl game with Colorado was basically the real Big 12 title game to them?
I did see that.
What did you think of that?
I think that Colorado is one of the biggest jokes in college football. I think Colorado was absolutely it's about time Colorado actually played somebody, because once you played somebody, you found out what they were. And I'll tell you exactly what I'm talking about because I put these in my notes today about Colorado. They were not a good football team. They were 0-6. This is Colorado under Deion Sanders. 0-6 versus top 25 teams. 2-9 versus power conference teams with at least a 500 record. Lots of smack talk and a lot of sunglasses. But, in the last 2 years, this is 2 seasons, 0-6 against top 25 teams, 2-9 against power conference teams with at least a 500 record. Colorado was a sham. They weren't real. It was all fake. They didn't play anybody this year. They had the cakest schedule ever. ASU, every team would have beat. Iowa State would have beat them. Arizona State would have beat them, and BYU thumped them. BYU thumped them in that football game. 36-14. You lose by 3 touchdowns in the Alamo Bowl to BYU. I just didn't think Colorado was any good. So you were looking at who do you want ASU to play. I think that they were going to beat them. The team I didn't want ASU to play was BYU because you already played them. I didn't mind playing Colorado. I didn't mind playing Iowa State. The team I was most reluctant to play was BYU. Do you want to play a team a second time? Let's play this soundbite by Kenny Dillingham on ASU exceeding expectations this season.
Yeah, we are. I mean, there's no doubt we're playing with house money. I mean, to say we're not is just a lie. Nobody expected us to be here. But if you're a competitor and you wake up a day not wanting to compete versus the very best, then something's wrong with you. Our guys got to this point because they're ultra competitors, not because they're ever satisfied. So just because you're playing with house money doesn't mean you should be satisfied. We should be driven every single day to be the best version of ourselves. Repeat.
All right, that's Kenny Dillingham on the success of ASU. Big game tomorrow. We'll have all the coverage here starting at 8 o'clock in the morning. 8 a.m. We will have coverage getting you set for the game, which will kick off at 11 o'clock.
Thanks for watching Burns and Gambo. Click to see more from the guys and hit the button in the middle to subscribe so you never miss a video from Arizona sports.